Boy, we're a mess, aren't we? And what makes our fragile state even more fragile is this. 46 million Americans are currently living in poverty. We're draining all of the lifeblood and color out of our country, just like it has been sucked out of your screen over the last few minutes. Something's not wrong with your screen or your computer. We took it out because I wanted to take you back to a time where we had the same problems that we have today. That time was around 1920. In the 1920s, they had awful, awful problems, and they needed a solution. Well, they found one. What is the solution to poverty? Prosperity. Calvin Coolidge understood. You can't spend your way to prosperity any more than an alcoholic can drink their way to sobriety. Instead, you cut spending, you cut taxes. The elites will tell you that we can't pay for the tax cuts, but they completely ignore the fact that tax cuts pay for themselves. Now, how is that possible? Because if you get out of people's way, if you free companies up, they hire more people. And those people create more and new and different things. And by doing that, that creates more jobs, which means those people who are now working that weren't pay taxes. That's how we got to the Roaring '20s. America was in a depression following the end of World War I. Unemployment doubled in 1 year to 11.7%. The gross national product declined 6.9%. That's staggering. The Dow fell 47%. The Fed raised the interest rates to a record 7%. It was ugly. And then Woodrow Wilson left office. And Harding and Coolidge came in. And what they did is never talked about in history books, because history books are written by progressives, and progressives don't like the answers that actual history provides. What they did was reduce the size and spending of government. They drastically reduced taxes. They repealed crazy ideas on taxes, like the wartime excess profits tax. That means any profit that a company had, they had to spend it, because those were excess profits. You didn't need all that profit. The top marginal tax rate on individuals fell from 73% during Woodrow Wilson to 25% by 1925. Gee, what caused the Roaring '20s? Now, it was a Republican that came in, but he was a progressive Republican, and they hate it every time I say this, the Hoover family, but he was. He raised that income tax back up to 63%. Gee, why do you think we had such a hard time? We had progressives in both parties. Unemployment under Coolidge averaged 3.3%. It was, under Wilson, 20%. Federal debt lowered from $22.3 billion in 1923 to $16.9 in 1929. Federal spending was slashed nearly in half in just 2 years, from $6.4 billion to $3.3 billion. Wait a minute. How could the debt and the deficit be slashed when they also slashed taxes? So what happened? Well, the Roaring '20s happened. Massive expansion and innovation. This is a Chevrolet. Nobody had cars. Nobody had cars back then. In the early 1920s, only the wealthy could afford a car. The fat cats. But by the end of the 1920s, 1 in 5 Americans owned a car. And a lot of things changed. I don't know about you. I'm watching Downton Abbey. My wife and I are positively addicted to it. The beginning of the 1920s, only the wealthy had top hats. But by the end, ladies had flapper outfits and men had top hats. Prosperity came to everybody. Well, that's until the elites started to make evil people out of those evil people that have money. The economic classes, however, were for the first time dressing alike. They became accessible. And, well, everything wasn't accessible. They did have prohibition. The progressives didn't like anybody drinking in these days. But a lot of things changed. Nobody in 1920 had a refrigerator. Who would have a refrigerator? Who would have a phone? Well, nobody did. In 1926, only 5,800 people had ever flown in an airplane. But 4 years later, it was 70 times that amount. And if you wanted to hear somebody breaking a record, well, you could just listen to the radio, because by the end of the 20s, almost everybody had a radio. But not only was there more stuff, there was also something else that was kind of unique: less crime. In fact, it wasn't just less crime. Woodrow Wilson is using exactly the same technique that President Barack Obama is using. President Barack Obama is using race to pit us against each other. Well, Woodrow Wilson did the same thing, except it was reverse. It was white racism. He was stirring up the Ku Klux Klan and trying to make everybody afraid of each other. But by the time he got out of office and the end of Coolidge, racial tensions eased. Why? The boom. KKK membership soared in 1920, right in the middle of an economic depression. But as the economy strengthened, KKK membership fell drastically. It was at a peak in 1925 of 5 million people. 2 years later, 350,000. Now, what law did they pass to make people get out of the Klan? None, except for the law of prosperity. People are likely to do stupid things when they're hungry, and they're less likely to do stupid, insane stuff when they're fed, when they're fat and sassy. Coolidge was an amazing guy. He was Ronald Reagan's favorite president. And boy, nobody pays attention to him. These are original letters from Calvin Coolidge. This is a letter from Calvin Coolidge right after the stock market collapsed. He's a pretty amazing guy. In an amazing time. This is Babe Ruth's. Where is it? Where does it say Babe Ruth? Here it is. There's Babe Ruth's luggage right here in the 1920s. A lot of things happened in the 1920s. Nobody ever seems to ask what caused the Roaring '20s. Will anyone bother to look at the cause? We will tonight when we come back.